Making our way through Hebrews 12, we finished chapter 11, which was, I think, an accomplishment to work through that whole chapter and try to see as many details as we could and try to see the big picture at the same time. And now we're making some progress through chapter 12. And I'll be in Honduras for the next 2 Sundays, so we'll get to, Lord willing, the end of verse 17 tonight, and then the week after I get back, hopefully finish up chapter 12. And really, by maybe the end of September, we'll be done with our study of Hebrews. I really hope that it's been a blessing to you, seeing this book and seeing how the argument of it, and seeing how it flows, and seeing how it encourages us, seeing how it warns us. It's my favorite book of the Bible, the book of Hebrews. Tonight we're getting, as you could see, the title is Pursuing Our Position, and we're getting to the 5th warning passage of Hebrews. 5 warning passages in Hebrews. 5 very difficult passages in Hebrews, and they all are similar in that they are difficult, and they're stern warnings. But we're going to get to we'll call the first part of warning number 5 tonight, and then we'll finish up warning number 5 when I get back from Honduras. But let's look at the text. We'll start reading in verse 14. Let's read. Pursue peace with all men, and the sanctification without which no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one comes short of the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble, and by it many be defiled, that there be no immoral or godless person like Esau, who sold his own birthright for a single meal. For you know that even afterwards, when he desired to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought for it with tears. Very short passage, but it's packed with amazing truth. It's packed with difficult truth. And at first glance, it looks like it's packed with bunches of different truths all put together. So we really need to see what's going on in this passage. God put all these truths in here. There's one little passage for a reason. Hopefully tonight we will see why. But let's start with a word of prayer before we go any further. Let's pray. Lord, we love you. We love your word. We do ask you now, Lord, that you would help us to see it clearly. Lord, that you'd help us to understand it accurately. Lord, that you'd help us to apply it diligently. Lord, you pray that you'd give us clarity on what this means, Lord, and how all these truths are connected together. And Lord, how they make a difference in our lives, how they make a difference in our walk with Christ. And Lord, how it's all based on what Christ has done for us, based on who he is. And Lord, we do pray for your help now. We do ask you, Lord, that we would worship you tonight as we see your word. And we do pray this all in Christ's name. Amen. Well, last week we looked at the Lord's discipline in verses 4 through 13. And we saw that discipline is an essential part of our running this race and running it well and finishing it well. And we also saw that discipline was formative and corrective. See, if you don't know what those words mean, think about this. Formative. Whenever you're a parent, this is a great place right here. We all have little kids. This is the kind of discipline we give our children, not necessarily because they did something wrong, but maybe they're just weak in a certain area and they need to be gently guided, shaped, and pointed in the right direction. That's formative discipline. We teach them about who God is. We teach them the Bible. We teach them about how the world works, all these things, formative. But we also, for our children, do corrective discipline. And what's that? That's what we commonly think of when we think of discipline. That's when our kids disobey us, we punish. Whenever they disobey us, we have to somehow discipline them to show them that what they did was wrong. Now, think about this. Whenever they sin or whenever they disobey us, do we go ahead and drop them off at an orphanage and say, I'm done with these kids? Do we do it that way? No, this is corrective. It means we still love them, right? And that's why we are disciplining them. So that's how the Lord's discipline works with us. It's formative and corrective. It's not legal punishment. Otherwise, we would all be in a different place tonight. He gently shapes us and guides us in our areas, and sometimes he has to discourage us. But he does it because he loves us. He does it to help us finish the race well. That's the whole point of the verses we saw last week. And there's really no greater security for a child of God than to be disciplined by God. If you're not being disciplined by God, then there should be no security. So this is great security for us as God's people. Then last week we finished up with Tim Tebow's favorite Bible verse in verse 12. If you weren't here last week, you get to hear the story again. But it says in verse 12 and verse 13, strengthen the hands that are weak and the knees that are feeble, and make straight paths for your feet, so that the limb which is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. And that was the end of the passage on the Lord's discipline. But think about it. He left us at that note. The author left us right there, and he intends to keep on moving, keeps on intending to move on in his discussion, continue his argument, and tell us more about what he was just saying. And I believe this passage we're looking at tonight answers this question. How do we make straight paths for our feet? How do we strengthen weak hands? How do we strengthen feeble knees? How do we do those things? And I believe that this passage tonight, verses 14 through 17, answer that question for us. You can see the structure. I love the way God put his word together. So many statements in Scripture that are so well organized, so well thought out, packed with truth, and this is no different. You have this main command here to pursue. Pursue it. And then what are we pursuing? It tells us two things. It says pursue peace. Then what's next? Pursue holiness. And now it tells us a way to do that. Seeing to it, literally translated, seeing to it that three different things. That no one comes short of the grace of God. And then two, that no root of bitterness will spring up and cause trouble. And then number three, that there will be no immoral or godless person like Esau. See how well this is organized by God himself, putting us together and showing us how to make straight paths for our feet, how to do this together as a community of Christ, as a new covenant community. So as we run this race, there's things that we need to put off, things that we need to put on, things that we need to seek, things that we need to avoid, things that we need to start doing, things that we need to stop doing. And that's what this passage is going to tell us. It's a very, very practical passage, very hands-on passage, things that let's get moving, let's get doing these things. So tonight we're going to look at priorities to pursue, and then secondly, pitfalls to prevent. So let's look at number one, priorities to pursue. In verse 14, it says, pursue peace with all men, and the sanctification without which no one will see the Lord. Now this verse is going to show us two very important parts of our position as Christians. When it comes to our relationship with God, when it comes to being a Christian, there's a vertical aspect of it. And maybe some of you have heard this before. There's a vertical aspect, and then there's a horizontal. Something that where we relate to God, and then there's overlap, and then how we relate to each other as Christians. And I think right in this verse it tells us both of those things. It shows us the vertical aspect of holiness and the horizontal aspect of peace. Peace with each other, then holiness toward God. Now, just to qualify this, sometimes in the Bible, can peace be vertical? Yes, right. In Romans chapter 5, we have peace with God, right? There's a vertical aspect to it. And then sometimes can holiness be horizontal? Yeah, sometimes it can be. 1 Peter 1 says, be holy yourselves also in all your behavior. So there's a horizontal aspect to it. But notice specifically what's going on in this verse. It says peace, and then what is put together with peace here in this verse? Peace with, you can say it out loud, all men. And then holiness, what's that connected with? You can say it out loud too. Seeing who? The Lord, right? So that's a vertical. So we have both aspects here, the vertical and the horizontal. There's going to be overlap, definitely, but there's this special emphasis going on in here of holiness in our lives before God and peace with each other. I also want you to think about the word pursue. Think about that word for a second. Pursue. Does he say, whenever you get around to it? Does he say, whenever you get the chance? Or think about this as a possibility for the next week. Does he say any of those? He says, pursue. And he chose a very strong word here. It means to move rapidly, move decisively towards something, to run after it, to press on. The Apostle Paul was very familiar with this word. He used it as the word for persecute. He said, I used to persecute the church of God. Same word. I used to pursue the church of God beyond measure, and I tried to destroy it. That's how strong this word is right here. Pursue, chase after it, and don't give up. So what are we called to pursue here? Number one, peace. Peace. In verse 14 it says, pursue peace with all men. Sounds a lot like a passage we're familiar with in Psalm 34, depart from evil and do good, seek peace and pursue it. Now notice the extent of it. It says to all men. Think about that for a second. That's actually a very general statement here. A very general statement about who we're pursuing peace with. Some Bible teachers, they get to this part of the verse and they say, this is just talking about the new covenant community. Pursue peace with other Christians. That's definitely a huge part of it, but I think it's a much broader thing of all men. That's what it says. I say that because this could include people who were, think about this, people who were mistreating them. People who were their persecutors. People who were giving them the hard time. Pursue peace with, it says, all men. And think about why this is important, because in the first century, New Covenant Christianity was not accepted by the Roman government or the Jewish people. And whenever we're going through chapter 10, they were stuck in the middle without any friends on either side. Their society rejected Christians. That's how they were. That's their situation. Now they're saying, pursue peace with all men. Now think about this. Think about the difference in our society today. There's all kinds of agendas our society is pushing today, right? You think of a big list. Think about how they push their agendas. Think about how they define the word tolerance. You hear things like this. It says, you will accept homosexual marriage. And they don't say this next part out loud, but they have this impression, this look on their face, the or else impression they give. They say, you will embrace transgenderism as a valid expression of someone's identity, and then they add, or else. Or you will promote such and such a social agenda, and again, or else. We see this in our society all the time. It's always adding that or else modifier. But think about what believers are called to do and be. They're called to be something different. That's why you have all over the New Testament. It's amazing to see how the New Testament books address suffering Christians. When people don't accept Christianity, when they don't accept your commitment to Christ, when they mock you, is it time to put your set up and time to start fighting? Is it time to charge like an offended bull? Or is it time to lay dead in the middle of the road like a possum? None of those are the options, are they? There is no or else. This says here to pursue peace with all men. Think about what he's calling them to do. Suffering Christians, now he's telling them, be at peace with all men. This is a very high calling. You see this throughout the New Testament. Paul says in Ephesians 4, being diligent to preserve the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. Romans 14, so then we pursue the things which make for peace and the building up of one another. And I love the way Paul puts this in Romans chapter 12. He says, if possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. Same teaching. Now the big question is, why do we need to be told to pursue peace? Why do we as Christians need to be told to pursue this? This is a command for us, and if there's a command in the Bible, we always need to ask why. Now think about this. Why is he telling us to pursue this? I believe it reveals something about our hearts. It reveals something about human nature. It reveals something about depravity. First thing we could say about this is that peace does not come naturally to us. It doesn't come naturally to us. Now, we're not talking about a facade that pretends everything's okay or where you just don't bring anything up, but this is true peace. It's talking about here, true peace with each other. Think about when it's easy to pursue peace. Is it ever easy to pursue peace? Is it easy whenever someone offended you to pursue peace with that person? Say, no, it's not easy. What about if someone's angry with you without a reason? Is it easy to go to that person and try to pursue peace with that person? No, what do we do there? We say, that's not my problem. I didn't do anything. It's not easy then either. What about if you offended somebody else? Is that easy to pursue peace then? When is it easy to pursue peace? There's never a context in which it is easy to pursue it. You never fall into peace. It's not something that just happens. It's not the natural course of things. Our fallen nature actively seeks enmity. It actively seeks conflict. There's something the world does not want to admit, but the human nature, humans are naturally conflict starters. That's how we are by nature. Even our video games, all the fun video games are what? Some kind of conflict, right? Might be small, might be big, but there's conflict. We like it. Down deep in our hearts, we like the conflict. We like the problem. Now, there are people who enjoy conflict more than others. Is that true? That's definitely true. But the point is that we have no clue what a life without conflict even looks like. We have no clue what that's like. That's one reason why we probably don't look forward to heaven as much as we should, because we can't even imagine a place where there's no conflict, where there's no problems between people. The true peace is not natural and easy. It's not something that will just happen to you. We have to pursue it. Someone this very week, or I should say last week, pursued peace with me. But it took a phone call. It took time. It took effort. It took a conversation. But it's worth it. That's what we're talking about, pursuing peace with all men. Next reason why he tells us this is because we are naturally bad at pursuing peace. Sorry to disappoint you guys, but we are naturally bad at it. Ken Sande, who's heard of Ken Sande, counselor? Who's read his book, The Peacemaker? Yeah, here's a great graph that he put in his book. Now, you have what he's called the slippery slope. And what he means by that is 9 times out of 10, each of us in this room will fall either here or here. It's uncommon and difficult to be in this middle section. So it's a slippery slope. I'm not going to go through every single one of those words, but the point is we can tend to go to either side or the other. And so on one side, or this side for you, you have people who escape or cover up conflict or run away from problems. And then on the other side, you have the people who are more brazen and they want to attack it and chase right after it and are going to pick at it. But they're both wrong. Neither of them are actually seeking peace. Either you're trying to cover it up or you're trying to make it worse than it already is. He tells us we need to pursue peace with each other. We will always be giving each other occasions to pursue peace. Think about that. As long as we're living together, we will always be giving each other reasons to pursue peace. As long as I'm your friend, I will be giving you reasons to pursue peace with me. There will always be a culture of needing to pursue peace. Even the people who are closest to you. And in fact, the people who are closest to you are the ones who create that environment the most, where you naturally get a conflict with each other. We will always be giving each other those occasions. Think about this too. We will not be able to run the race, and this is where the rubber meets the road, literally. We will not be able to run the race if we are harboring grudges against each other. So he says, pursue peace with all men. He's just telling us to run the race with endurance. How are we going to run the race with endurance if you're being zapped with all your energy, is being zapped by these conflicts that are unresolved, you're not willing to pursue, and they're lingering and they're staying around? We won't have any endurance to finish the race. So he says, pursue peace. And next he says, pursue holiness. It's also in verse 14. The NASB has the word sanctification. Who has the ESV here in the room? How many hand raisers tonight? Got 2 ESVs. All right, so that has the word holiness. Same Greek word. They're both good translations. If you were to look back at chapter 10, verse 14, you don't have to, but just listen carefully. Chapter 10, verse 14 says that by one offering, Jesus has perfected for all time those who are sanctified. Same word here, okay? People who have been made holy, people who have been set apart. That's their position. And when we see this word in Hebrews, it's something that we have, something that is our position. And sanctification is the position that we have in Christ. And now, what's he telling us to do? This sanctification, this holiness that he says we already have, what is he telling us to do with it? Pursue it. Now, what does that mean? Is that a contradiction? What does that mean? How can we pursue something we already have? I think at this point it's good to distinguish between justification and then progressive sanctification. And what's progressive sanctification? That's moving along in holiness, growing in holiness. And I have another chart. Sorry, I'm like Mike's sermon illustration this morning. I got charts tonight, okay? So you have to forgive me. But this another chart. This is from J.C. Ryle on his book, Holiness. So if you've never read that book, you need to read it. It's very important, very foundational for these things that we're talking about. But think about this. How are justification and sanctification different? Or how are justification and progressive sanctification different? Or similar, I'm sorry. We'll start with similar and then show how they're different. How are they similar? Where do they relate? They're both the grace of God, right? Both of them are a result of the grace of God. God working in our lives. They're both based on the work of Christ. They're both founded on the work of Christ. And they're both found in the same persons. What does that mean? That means if there is someone who's justified, they're also going to be sanctified. It's going to be in the same person. You're never going to have a justified person who's not sanctified or a sanctified person who's not justified. It's impossible. And they also begin at the same time. Once justification starts, your sanctification also starts. That's how they're similar. And they're both necessary for salvation. That's how the Bible presents these. They're both absolutely necessary. And neither of them come by the flesh. Neither of them are by the works of the flesh. And Galatians proves that point. That's how they're similar. But now think about how they're different. Are they different? And in which ways would they be different? Think about this. We got another chart for you. You have justification on one side. An alien righteousness. That means it comes from outer space. No, not really. What does alien mean? From outside of yourself. It's not your own righteousness. And in this case, it's the righteousness of who? It's the righteousness of Christ credited to your account. That's justification. But what about progressive sanctification? That's where you're actually growing in holiness. It's an inward holiness that you're growing in. It's small steps. It's progressive. It takes time. It's not perfection, but it's actually inward righteousness that you're growing in. Justification. How many times do you have to be justified? One. How many times can you be justified? Once. It's finished. That's the beauty of the gospel. It's a finished work. But sanctification is what? It's ongoing. It's progressive. It continues until the day we die. Now, justification, there's no degrees. That means what? You don't get a bachelor's or a master's, right? No, that's not what it means. Can anyone be more justified than the next person? Can I be more justified than Wes? Can Wes be more justified than Ben? That doesn't work that way. There's no degrees. But can someone be more sanctified? Now, don't be raising your hand saying, yes, I'm the most sanctified. Don't do that. But it's possible that someone has been growing more in sanctification than another person. So they are different in that respect. Now, here's some big words, okay? Who's ever heard the word monergistic? Justification is the work of God alone. He performs that work in our hearts, freely by His grace. Sanctification is synergistic. What does that mean? That means we do cooperate. After He's justified us, after He saved us, we do actually, and as we're getting at the main point of what we're talking about here in chapter 12, verse 14, that we do pursue it. We do pursue sanctification. That's how they are different, justification and progressive sanctification. So think about this. This call to pursue holiness is a call to pursue concrete holiness in our lives, in our affections, things that we cherish, things that we love, things that are deep in our hearts. This is holiness there too. This is a call to pursue holiness in our thoughts, things that we think about, things that we meditate on throughout the day, things that our decision-making process, our thoughts need to be sanctified more and more conformity to who Christ is. And in our actions, things that we actually do and things that we refrain from doing. This is a call to pursue holiness in those areas, and what we think, what we cherish, what we do. Now think about this. I've heard this rebuttal, this argument from several people now. You tell them this. You say you need to pursue actual holiness in your life. And someone comes along the way, and they say, isn't this placing a yoke on the neck of the disciples, which neither they nor their fathers could bear? They make this question, say, this is unrealistic. God gives us free grace. We can live how we please. Is this a yoke that we cannot bear? That's the question I'm asking you now. And I'm asking myself, is this a yoke that we cannot bear? This call to pursue holiness. Think about this. There's a time when I would say yes to that question. And there's a time when I would say no to that question. Here's when I would say, yes, this burden is too difficult to bear. If you leave Christ out of the picture, if you forget that Christ has finished the work of redemption, if you think that somehow your own acts of holiness improve his work of redemption, that's when I would say, yes, that yoke is too difficult to bear. It would break your spiritual neck. You could not bear that. That's when I would say yes. But there is a time when I would say no. And that's right here in this context. No, this is not an impossible burden to bear. It's a call that we can carry out. It's right here in the book of Hebrews. Everything that we've seen from chapter 1 all the way to where we are right now, the author has buttressed, he supported everything he said based on what? Who Christ is, what he's done. That it's a finished work, and that everything he's telling us to do, all the warnings, all the exhortations, all the encouragements, everything is based on that work, that person. So this means that we're pursuing the work he's already doing in us. That is the crucial point. We're pursuing what he's already at work in our hearts doing. Remember from last week, his discipline and what it produces, what it does? We saw that he disciplines us so we can share in what? His holiness. And discipline doesn't seem very much fun at the time, but he's doing what? He's trying to produce the peaceful fruit of righteousness. So we're pursuing what God's already at work in our hearts to do. We're aligning our pursuits with his plan, with his program. Now, this text answers the question of importance. Why is this so important, this pursuing of holiness? Why is this such a crucial issue? Why are we spending so much time on this one verse right now? Why is this so important? What does it say? If without this holiness, what will happen? No one will see the Lord. And that word which in the verse, without which, is pointing specifically right back to the word sanctification, or to the word holiness. Without that holiness, without that sanctification, you're not going to see the Lord. And here's the P of our tulip, right here in this text. Every true believer will persevere in faith until the very end. A true believer who's someone who pursues his relationship with Christ, who pursues holiness until the day he dies. That's the definition. That's a huge part of the definition of what a true believer actually is and does. Think about these verses. I don't have them on the board, but Colossians 1:22. If you can turn fast, I'll let you go there, but I'm going to start reading. Colossians 1:22. Paul writes, "He has now reconciled you in his fleshly body through death in order to present you before him holy and blameless and beyond reproach." And these are hard verses. Think about this, though. Difficult verses. And he says, "If indeed you continue in the faith, firmly established and steadfast, and not moved away from the hope of the gospel. If indeed you continue." If you can turn there, Hebrews 3:14. We have become partakers of Christ. We've become his people if we hold fast the beginning of our assurance firm until the end. What do these verses mean? Matthew 13, verse 13. Jesus told his disciples, "You will be hated by all because of my name. But the one who endures to the end, he will be saved." Easy verses? Those are not easy verses, are they? Are they true? Matthew 13:13. Actually, that might be Mark 13:13. This is the goal of the Christian life. It says it right there at the end of the verse. The Lord, Christ himself, without which you will not see the Lord. And without holiness, I would like to say, too, that you would not even want to see them, would you? We kind of pretend and we kind of trick ourselves into thinking everything's all right and we'd want it and everything would be okay. But how would you enjoy spending an eternity with Christ, worshiping him, seeing him in all his holiness if you had no desire whatsoever to do that while you're on this earth? You wouldn't. You won't see him and you won't want to see him without this holiness. Peace and holiness, those are the priorities. These are both essential. These are both necessary things. We can't choose one side and take the other or not take the other. We can't. We have to have both. You can't say, well, I'm more of a vertical Christian. I like the vertical aspects. I'm not wired for all the horizontal stuff. You can't say, well, I'm more of a me and God type Christian. I'm not really a people Christian. That doesn't work. You can't say, I do better when I'm on my own. Or I would be a great Christian if it weren't for all the people around me. I wouldn't be so irritable if it weren't for all the people that I'm associated with. I would be such a much better Christian. I'm more of a vertical Christian. That's thinking, it's tricking yourself into thinking that you can have holiness without peace. Or on the other side, you say, I'm more of a horizontal Christian. I don't get into too much stuffy theological stuff. I don't have time for all the vertical stuff. There's too much to do. There's too many injustices in the world to fight for me to spend time with this petty stuff called holiness and personal holiness and pleasing God in those areas. That's thinking that you can have peace without holiness. You can't have one without the other. Pursue both. He doesn't give us a list of options. So if these things are essential, and they are, this is a command from God himself to pursue peace, pursue holiness. The question we have to ask ourselves is how much holiness is necessary? How much peace is enough? That's what we need to ask ourselves. We'll leave this room thinking, yeah, I'm great. I'm pretty holy. I'm pretty peaceful. I think I'll be all right. But how much is enough? How do you know? How do you know when you're okay? How do you know if you've reached that point where you'll be able to see the Lord? These are tough questions, aren't they? I'm not going to answer all of that tonight, but I do believe verses 15 through 17 put us on the path where we need to be. Where it says in verse 15, verse 17, see to it. See to it, and then 3 parallel statements after that. Pitfalls to prevent. Pitfalls to prevent. What comes to your mind when you hear those words, see to it? You ever have a boss or a parent say those words to you? I've had it. Yeah. Does it mean keep looking and see if something happens? Watch out and see if it happens, let me know. Is that what it means? It means make sure it happens, right? Make sure this gets done. See to it. It's where we get the word, actually, overseer. Another word for pastor. It means keeping a careful watch, being on the lookout, having a careful eye, being observant rather than oblivious. One pastor called it sanctified meddling. That's a great term. Sanctified meddling. In other words, you're here sanctified, you're sanctioned by God to get into each other's business and figure out if these things are happening to prevent the pitfalls that are listed out here. 3 things, 3 pitfalls we are called to prevent, make sure to avoid. This is for ourselves. This is for others. 3 parallel statements. They each build on each other. They each help describe each other. Let's look at pitfall number 1. Falling short of God's grace. Falling short of God's grace. First statement says, make sure that no one comes short of the grace of God. This is tough, isn't it? Say, what does this verse mean? Does this mean I should say, hey, as you leave here, don't fall short of the grace of God, and I've done my job? What does this mean? Think about it. What it doesn't mean. What does this not mean? It does not mean that grace is hard to get. It does not mean that God is reluctant. It does not mean that God's grace runs out quickly. It doesn't mean that. It says he gives us grace upon grace upon grace upon grace, right? And this also does not mean that these people in question had no profession of faith. These are people who had made professions of faith, people who identify themselves as Christians. This is not people who had no means of grace available. They had everything at their fingertips. They had everything they needed. This is not people who had no gospel witness, no biblical preaching available. This is people who had all these things. So God is not the problem here. God's grace is not the problem. Where's the problem? Where does this verse point to the problem? Us. Make sure that no one comes short of the grace of God. This is an informed rejection of God's grace. As we've already seen this in Hebrews several times already, this is the heart of unbelief. You've seen what the gospel's about, and then reject it. Look back at chapter 3, verse 12. Chapter 3, verse 12. The author has already told them the same thing. 3:12, he says, take care, brethren, that there not be in any one of you. People originally listening to this sermon in the first century or reading this letter in the first century, make sure that there's not in any one of you an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God. Same concept. But instead, encourage one another day after day, as long as it's still called today. And there we are, making peace with each other and helping each other and preventing pitfalls with each other, so that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. Now look at chapter 4, verse 1. It says, "Therefore let us fear, if, while a promise remains of entering his rest, any one of you may seem to have come short of it." Same word that's in our text tonight. Right here, this is a call to repentance, a call to our own hearts to turn away from sin. And again, these statements build on each other. Look at pitfall number 2, also in verse 15. A root of bitterness. It says, make sure that no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble, and by it many be defiled. God told the nation of Israel the same thing under the Old Covenant. In Deuteronomy 29, it says, setting up this covenant with them so that there will not be among you a man or woman or family or tribe whose heart turns away from the Lord, our God, to go and serve the gods of those nations. That there will not be among you a root bearing poisonous fruit and wormwood. Same warning that the Hebrews are getting here in the book of Hebrews. Now think about how this works out in reality. This could happen because you have a sinful desire that's not being fulfilled. You get something that you really want, a sinful desire, and it doesn't come to happen, and then you get bitter about it. That could happen, right? Bitter because you didn't get your sinful way. But this might start with a legitimate concern. It might start even with a good desire. And I think it's what's happening in this context. Again, this context, people, they were mistreated Christians. So was it wrong for them to want physical safety? Was it wrong for them to want good social standing? Was it wrong for them to want safety from the Roman government? Was it wrong for them to want their own property? Was it wrong for them to not want to go to prison or be sent into exile? Were those things wrong? Those bad desires? That's what they were faced with, and that's what was happening. Those are all perfectly legitimate desires. These are things that we enjoy in our country every single day. But what happens when good things get taken away from us? That's the question we have to answer here. And in the Hebrews case, mistreatment was leading to bitterness. And the author is calling them to make sure that this doesn't happen, or if it is happening, to cut it off before it grows. Roots grow down first. Before they go up, they go down. I don't see the master gardener here. Master gardener here, Tim Dagnall? I'm not a master gardener. I'm going to give you the limit of my gardening experience. I was eating an avocado a couple years ago, and I thought I really would like to see how to plant this. So I did all the stuff. I looked up on YouTube, put it in a glass cup on the kitchen sink, and nothing happened. A few weeks later, nothing happened. But then eventually, you could see through the glass, little tiny root popped out the bottom of the seed. And then weeks and weeks and weeks later, things growing and growing and growing, filling up the cup. And after months, finally, at the top of the seed, a little tiny sprout came up. We usually don't get to see roots on our plants grow. We usually just get to see the shoot, right? And so it is with our sinful root of bitterness. It grows, it festers, it reaches into all the parts of our soul until it's taken control. It's usually subtle, it's stealthy, it goes undetected, it goes unnoticed. And then it's ready to do its damage. You can't see the roots growing. Sometimes you don't know. Most of the time, every time, you don't know until it's too late. Bitter roots make destructive fruit. Something that was hidden in your soul. Bitter thoughts that you were harboring towards somebody else. A sin you were holding on to in your heart. The roots have grown deep. They're stronger than ever. You can pull the weed up, but they keep on growing right back up. And now, in this text, it's not just your problem. Whose problem is it in this verse? You bring the whole church into your problem. It says when it springs out of the ground, it does what? It causes trouble, and by it many are defiled. It's not just your problem at that point. Bitterness never just affects one person. There's no such thing as a private sin, ultimately. Eventually, it's going to come out in all its ugliness. David sinned with Bathsheba in secret. What did Nathan the prophet tell him? It's going to be seen by everybody. All of Israel is going to see and experience the consequences of that private sin. It was not just David's problem. But there is hope because he's staying here to watch out for it. We're being called to watch out for it. We're being called to make sure this does not happen here in the church. See to it that no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble. The beauty of the Christian life is that we have the power in Christ to fight this. So I think there's two easy application points, two simple application points to take away from this root of bitterness. Number one is take the symptoms seriously. Okay, what are the symptoms? What are the evidences of this? I think a critical spirit is one huge one. A critical spirit. This past week, Savannah and I, we were reading a newspaper story, and it was a Christian article written by a Christian, and to be honest, it was terribly done. It was not a great article from a truthful standpoint and grammatical. It was just really butchered. So we were in the van reading this, and our kids were in the back, and we were making fun of it and pulling all the problems out of it. And one of our offspring, they're all great mirrors, but one of them said, you should take that home and you should just burn it. And my heart sank at that point. Why? He learned something from me. He learned to be critical. We weren't being charitable at all. We were being very mean. Now, there's a way to go about critiquing. Actually, I had a professor once in school. He said, if you're writing a book review, the best advice I can give you is pretend that the author of that book is sitting across the table for you while you write it. Best advice you could ever get for writing a book review. You can be truthful, but you can be loving all at the same time. Critical spirit, key evidence. Some Christians can't be happy unless they're being mean. You ever meet Christians like that? They just can't be happy unless they're being. When they don't look happy, but down inside they are happy because they're being mean. Some Christians think that if they're not standing up for the faith in some bold way, if they're not calling fire down on somebody, that means they're not fulfilling their duties. They think they have to be mean. This also shows up with gossip. It shows up with backbiting. The point is, if you start seeing things like this happen in your heart, you know a root of bitterness is probably growing, and you've got to cut it off before it does its damage. Don't just blow it off. Take notice of the symptoms. Second application point I would give you is trash your plans to follow through with your bitterness. What happens whenever you have a bitter heart? What happens when you have a bitter soul? What happens down deep in your heart? You meditate on it, right? You spend probably hours a week. You could probably never calculate. You probably spend hours a week thinking about this bitter thing. And you're stirring up your emotions. You're stirring up plans about how you're going to get back or what you're going to do about it. And you have plans to carry through with your bitterness. And that's how it springs up and causes trouble and defiles many people. But trash those plans to fulfill your bitterness. Trash them. Pursue the peace that Christ has provided his people. It's pitfall number 2, a root of bitterness. Well, you saw the last one. It disappeared. Pitfall number 3, immorality and godlessness. And we'll conclude on this. We end this passage with a story or a quick illustration about a man who really lived in a real place, in real time, in real history, who is the perfect picture, the perfect match for everything we just read and all these pitfalls. And who is it? Esau. Someone who fell short of God's grace. Someone who let a root of bitterness grow deep. Someone who illustrates immorality and godlessness. Let's read those verses. It says, "See to it that there be no immoral or godless person like Esau, who sold his own birthright for a single meal. For you know that even afterwards, when he desired to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought for it with tears." Wow. How do these verses describe Esau? What 2 words? It says immoral, godless. How would you like your name to go down in history? As immoral, godless. Immoral in the New Testament always refers to someone who is sexually immoral. It's where we get the word pornography from. Someone who perverts God's design for sexuality, immorality, a fornicator, godless, someone who's literally totally worldly, someone who has adopted the world's way of thinking, the world's way of doing things, someone who leaves God out of his mind, someone who leaves God's truth out of his mind whenever he makes any of his decisions, godless, worldly, no concern for what God desires whatsoever. That's how Esau is described here in this verse. And isn't it interesting how these always go together? Godlessness, immorality. Very interesting how these go together. If something bad happens at work, something bad happens in your family, then you take it out on a sexual sin. You've seen this before. They're connected. Godlessness and immorality. That's how he's described in this verse. Now, what did he do that was so bad? That's how he's described, but what did he do? What does the verse say? It says he sold his birthright. Genesis 25, I'll remind you of the story. Jacob had cooked some great stew, spiritual gift of cooking. Esau comes in from the field. He was famished. Esau said to Jacob, "Give me some of that red stuff, because I'm famished." Jacob said, "Okay, I'll make you a deal. Give me your birthright, and I'll give you some of this stew." Esau said, "I'm going to die. I'm about to die. So what of use is a birthright to me if I'm dead? So either I get the soup or a birthright." So he chooses the soup. And Jacob said, "First you got to swear to me." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went on his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright, the text says. How many meals? How many meals? One. One single meal. One moment of pleasure. It was all over. One Bible teacher said, Esau gave up the promise in order to ease his physical discomfort. And the original readers of Hebrews, they might consider giving up the promise in order to ease their social discomfort. Think about now what the text points us to, what we just saw in chapter 11. Moses, what did he choose? He chose mistreatment with the people of God rather than enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. Sin's only for a moment. One meal. That's it. And then it's over. How did Moses do this? He considered the reproach of Christ greater riches, greater wealth than anything Egypt had to offer. He had an eternal perspective. He had a perspective on Christ at the finish line. And then what was the result for Esau at the end of all this? No inheritance. No blessing. No repentance. Just tears. Just rejection. Isolation from love and grace. For us, as we are pursuing these priorities, as we're preventing these pitfalls, this is still connected to the beginning of chapter 12, where the key that we learned in verse 2, we need to fix our eyes on Jesus. He's the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, he despised the shame, and he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. That's our perspective as we carry out these most practical areas of our Christian life. Let's go ahead and have a word of prayer. Lord, we do love you. We do love your word. We do pray, Lord, that as we saw what the text says, even if it didn't click tonight, Lord, I pray that it would click in our hearts and minds this week. Lord, that you would compel us to follow what we've heard, or that we'd apply what we've heard in this text, Lord, that we would pursue these priorities of peace and holiness, Lord, that we would prevent in the church, Lord, in this community, in this local church, these terrible things from happening by your grace, for your glory. And we do pray all this in Christ's name. Amen.